The war was over, but the silence hadn't ended. It was 1978 when war correspondent Daniel Mercer found the folder. He was deep in the Canadian archives, researching a book on forgotten Wâpanagwut soldiers when he spotted something strange wedged between declassified artillery reports. A thin, oil-stained file with no formal label, just a hand-scrawled word in faded pencil across the front. Shepherd. Inside there were only 6 pages. 4 were mission logs. 1 was a ballistics report, and the last, a grainy photo of a rifle, lying in the snow beside a corpse with no dog tags, no helmet, and no identification. The weapon looked handmade, its wood chipped from years of wear, wrapped in sinew like a hunting bow. No scope, just iron sights and something carved into the stock, a hawk, wings folded, eyes narrowed. The kill list was short, but horrifying. Each entry contained the date, region, and outcome, all confirmed by Allied officers. But the name of the shooter had been redacted from every page. One comment, scribbled in the margin of a mission from March 1944, read, "Target eliminated 1,462 yards. No scope. Uphill wind. Unexplainable." Kill confirmed. Another simply said, "Same shooter? If so, give him a medal, or don't. He clearly doesn't want one." There was no unit designation, no military branch, no service number, just initials stamped repeatedly across the top, NS-47, likely standing for Native Sniper, File 47, a category Mercer had never seen before. He asked a retired intelligence officer for help. The man glanced at the folder and turned pale. "That's the ghost from Khan," he muttered. "He wasn't one of ours. Not exactly. He volunteered, but he didn't want records. Said, 'I won't fight your wars with your pen. Just show me where the evil sleeps.'" Mercer asked what happened to him. "Nothing happened," the man said. "That's the point." The ghost had no funeral, no monument, no entry in Canadian military archives. Just a kill count so absurd, some officers thought it was a coordinated effort, a team of sharpshooters passing off kills under one mythic identity. But in every retelling, the story was the same. One man, one rifle, one shot. German officers started avoiding exposed balconies. Allied generals started asking for him by name, a name no one could give. There was no photo, no official orders. Just signs he'd been there. A bullet buried where it shouldn't be. An enemy found staring at the sky. A single hawk feather left on the windowsill of a command post that had once housed a monster. It would take Mercer years to piece it all together. But the truth began here, not in the shot or the kill or the fame, but in the erasure, because before he became a legend, they erased his name. Before he was a ghost, he was just a boy. Born in 1919 on the shores of Lake Nipigon, he was named Wâpanagwut, Morning Cloud, by his mother, a healer. His father was a trapper and guide, rarely home, but when he was, he taught the boy how to walk without sound and how to shoot without blinking. By age 9, Wâpanagwut could strike a snowshoe hare through both eyes at 100 yards with a hand-whittled bow. He spoke little, listened much, and tracked everything. He belonged to no school, no church. The reserve was poor and overlooked, but his world was rich with signs, crows that warned, rivers that spoke, shadows that meant more than light. He studied them the way others studied math, understood that movement meant more than talk, that aim meant more than noise. In 1939, recruiters arrived in Thunder Bay. Posters showed soldiers in polished boots and clean uniforms, holding rifles in a world far removed from bush and bone. Wâpanagwut didn't go to enlist. He went to trade beaver pelts for salt, but a captain spotted him in the market. "You ever shoot one of those?" he asked, pointing to the battered hunting rifle slung over Wâpanagwut's shoulder. "No," Wâpanagwut said, stone-faced. "It shoots me." The captain laughed, until the boy took a can from 200 yards and dropped it with a single shot, then split a coin from the same distance. then vanished into the trees before the echo faded. That evening, 3 officers visited his home. They didn't ask him to wear a uniform. They didn't even ask him to shave. They just gave him a map, a rifle cleaner, and one question. If the killing is already happening, do you want to choose who walks away? He said nothing, just nodded once. They never registered him officially, never put him through boot camp. Instead, they gave him a number, an untraceable rifle, and a promise. You won't be ordered, you'll be asked. His code name was assigned by a French-Canadian officer who couldn't pronounce his real one. It came from a word scrawled in the corner of an old church map, shepherd. But the boy wasn't raised to lead sheep. He was raised to hunt wolves. By January 1940, he was dropped alone into a Norwegian village, tasked with eliminating a Nazi logistics officer overseeing a port invasion. Snow fell heavy. The town was asleep. And as the boat pulled away, the captain asked if he needed anything else. Wâpanagwut just tapped the rifle's barrel and said for the first time, "I already know where he'll stand." That was the night they stopped thinking of him as a boy. And the first night, a Nazi officer looked out a window and never saw the dawn. The wind howled like a living thing. It was January 14th, 1940, and Norway's coast was buried under 2 feet of powder. Somewhere inside the frozen port town of Namsos, a Nazi logistics officer named Otto Gruber was overseeing fortifications for an expected British landing. He moved between buildings with impunity. No escort, no urgency, because the war hadn't truly arrived here yet. Until it did. Wâpanagwut watched from a ridge above the town, lying prone for 6 hours. Without moving, the rifle, a Lee Enfield stripped to its skeleton, rested on a mound of snow wrapped in reindeer hide to keep the barrel from freezing to the skin. There was no scope, just 2 hand-filed iron sights and instinct. He had tracked Gruber's movements for 2 days, marking patterns. Every evening at precisely 17:06, the officer stepped onto a balcony facing the North Sea to smoke. No guards, just ritual and arrogance. The shot would be uphill, across wind, at 1,100 yards. Impossible, according to Allied sharpshooting manuals, but Wâpanagwut didn't read those. When the moment came, he didn't breathe, didn't blink, just listened to the snow. The wind shifted once, a pause in the howl, and in that stillness, he fired. The officer collapsed with the cigarette still between his fingers. A single hole, dead center, between the eyes. No one heard the shot. Locals only reported a thump against wood. Some thought he slipped. But in the German barracks, panic began. They found no footprints near the ridge, no casing, just one hawk feather driven into the frozen bark of a nearby tree. A calling card no one could decipher, and no one wanted to. It was his first wartime kill, and it rewrote everything. The British never officially acknowledged the hit. No medals were awarded, but word of it spread quickly among Allied intelligence. Reports began circulating in hushed tones. The native from the north did it. The one with the wooden gun. The ghost from Turtle Island. Wâpanagwut slipped onto a cargo ship before sunrise, leaving no trace. But he wasn't returning to base. He didn't believe in bases, he believed in targets. And something told him the next one was waiting further south. When he arrived in France weeks later, a major named Ellis handed him a file. "Think you can make a general disappear?" the major asked, smirking. Wâpanagwut didn't answer. He just looked at the grainy photo of the general in a wool coat, circled a smudge in the background, a reflection in a train window, and said, "He's not where you think he is." Then he walked out. The officers stared at each other, confused. None of them noticed he hadn't taken the file with him. It started as whispers, first in the French forests, then in the German trenches, stories of a shadow that moved without sound, of officers who died mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-thought. One German colonel, interrogated by Allied forces after the war, called him der Augenlose, the eyeless one. not because he had no eyes, but because they never caught a glimpse of his. By spring 1940, Nazi field commanders began issuing bizarre orders. Curtains were to be drawn at all windows, no smoking near glass, no standing in silhouette after dusk. Officers were to change sleeping quarters every night. But it didn't matter. Somehow, he still found them. Wâpanagwut had no team, no radio, no reinforcements, just an internal compass, a few dried berries, and a mind that could measure wind shifts by how pine needles danced. He didn't read maps, he felt them, and the more the war tried to box him in, the further he moved beyond it. On May 9, 1940, a German railway commander en route to Dunkirk was found dead inside a sealed passenger car. No broken glass, no forced entry, just a bullet hole the size of a thumbprint in the side window, and no exit wound. British command reviewed the case and dismissed it as internal sabotage, but one intelligence captain marked the file with a note. Distance of shot estimated at over 300 yards. Trajectory impossible. Only suspect, NS-47, of course. That was the strange part. No one had ever officially met him. Even the Canadians who supposedly deployed him had no confirmed photograph. When a war journalist tried to track his movements, he was told bluntly, "He doesn't move on our orders. He warns us where not to go." French villagers claimed they saw him walking ridge lines under moonlight, never running, never hiding. A single man with braided hair, rifle slung over one shoulder like a farmer's shovel. A widow from Saint-Étienne said he visited her barn one night to ask for water. She gave him bread and asked, "How do you know where to shoot?" He replied, "Same way you know when someone's lying." Her husband had been taken by the Nazis. She asked if he could find the man responsible. He just nodded once. That officer was found 6 days later in a guard tower, throat pierced 900 yards from the tree line. No angle should have made the shot possible. But that was the pattern. Every kill left generals scratching their heads, soldiers terrified, and physicists baffled. They started calling him the eye that never closed. Because wherever they looked, up, down, far, near, they always felt it watching. And every time a Nazi reached for his coffee cup or stepped onto a balcony, there was always the question, is today the day he blinks? By mid-1941, the legends had outpaced the man. Allied units began leaving hawk feathers on enemy positions as a warning. British officers used the phrase, "he's already hunting," to describe areas suddenly clear of German brass. And Nazi intelligence began circulating an internal memo: avoid prolonged exposure on rooftops, watch for reflective surfaces, beware of unusual silence before a senior officer's disappearance. But Wâpanagwut wasn't just killing, he was observing. He noticed that with each successful strike, the Nazi patrol routes changed. They grew more erratic, more desperate. Entire platoons were pulled off the front to protect a single general's movement through France. Allied command realized that one sniper, without ever firing a second shot, was shifting entire enemy deployments, bleeding manpower, time, and morale. And yet, his weapon was falling apart. The handmade rifle, a hybrid of Lee-Enfield internals and carved ashwood stock, had splintered near the trigger housing. He tried to replace it, but nothing store-bought felt right in his hands. The weight was wrong. The sound was off. They were made for soldiers, not hunters. Then, a Métis blacksmith in Belgium offered him something different, a modified stock reinforced with aircraft steel. Lighter than walnut, colder to the touch, and impossible to splinter. "It will sing when you breathe," the smith said, "and scream when you aim." He engraved the new buttstock with a hawk feather pressed in brass, not decorative, but functional, to balance the counterweight. It gave the rifle its new name among Allied recon, the steel feather. With the new weapon, Wâpanagwut's range increased, a confirmed hit at 1,600 yards, then 1,710, a moving kill from a boat at night in a thunderstorm. German engineers called the shots ballistically improbable. Mathematicians tried to reconstruct the angles. None succeeded. British scientists requested to examine his rifle. He refused. "It listens to me." "Come," he said, "you'll make it deaf." Meanwhile, Allied command continued denying his existence. He wasn't in any battalion. His name didn't appear on any payroll, and yet they began routing intelligence to him, coded drops left in tree hollows, wrapped in birch bark, with red thread. He would find them, read them, and choose. He was no longer a sniper. He was a force, a physics-defying answer to evil, an invisible rebellion from the First Nations of the North. His kills were never sadistic, always precise, surgical, and silent, except once. A Nazi officer responsible for raising an entire Cree settlement in 1940 was found impaled to a church door in the Netherlands, not by a bullet, but by a metal spike. Witnesses said they saw a hawk flying in circles above the village the night before. And on the ground below, a single message carved into the wooden frame. You didn't hear the shot because there wasn't one. They couldn't track him, so they tried to trap him. In late 1941, German intelligence devised an operation called Geisterkarte, Ghost Map. The plan was simple: fake a high-ranking general's visit to an occupied French town, plant decoy officers in predictable positions, and wait for the sniper to reveal his location. 100 men were stationed across rooftops, towers, and windows. A Luftwaffe spotter plane circled overhead. Sniper teams scanned the ridgelines, and one SS officer kept his finger on a trigger wired to detonate the square if the ghost showed up. But he never took the bait, because Wâpanagwut didn't follow maps. He followed silence. Instead of targeting the decoys, he went after the map itself. 3 days before the trap was set, the German cartographer responsible for designing the mock operation was found in a wine cellar in Paris, dead, frozen, and untouched by violence. No blood, no wounds, just eyes wide open and a faint mark pressed into his palm, a single feather drawn in charcoal. The documents on his desk were missing. When Allied command intercepted German radio chatter later that week, they heard nothing about the decoys. Instead, panic. The map is gone. He knew before we even started. Back in the forest of Lorraine, Wâpanagwut crouched beside a fire built from German tactical papers. He didn't need coordinates to strike. He needed rhythm, predictability, the arrogance of men who believed they controlled the ground simply because they had drawn it. But the earth doesn't obey ink. His next move was perhaps his most chilling. In early 1942, the body of a Waffen-SS colonel was found slumped over a piano in a commandeered estate outside Dijon. The bullet had passed through an open window, across a courtyard, and through 2 inches of leaded glass, shattering not just the colonel's skull, but the illusion of safety. Pinned to the piano was a copy of the original Geisterkarte plan, across the top, handwritten in perfect English. "You drew the map. I rewrote the terrain." British intelligence began referring to him in reports not by name, but by frequency. North, Echo 1, the signal they believed he was operating under. In truth, he had no signal, no frequency, just silence. Meanwhile, an American reporter embedded with British command heard one officer whisper, "He's not sniping anymore. He's hunting thoughts." And that's when it changed. The war was no longer just about movement, it was about memory. Because Wâpanagwut wasn't just erasing lives, he was erasing certainty. By spring 1942, Wâpanagwut had become a myth with a body count. German officers stopped holding briefings near windows. Armored convoys rerouted at the whisper of his presence. One Luftwaffe general even issued a bizarre standing order: if a bird hovers more than 10 seconds, cancel all movement. Morale was cracking, not from bombs, not from battles, but from the idea that a man out there could shoot through time and space. And then came the bullet that shouldn't have hit. It happened near the Swiss border, in a mountain pass outside Annecy. The target? A Gestapo interrogator named Helmut Krauss, notorious for what he did to resistance fighters. Always traveled with a decoy double, always moved at irregular hours, always wore body armor reinforced with British steel. He also traveled by night. But Wâpanagwut didn't care for light, or armor, or body doubles. He watched from the high crags, snow melting under his breath, tracked footprints that the Germans believed the wind would erase, timed the convoy's exhaust smoke against the moon. Then he did something no trained sniper ever would. He fired before he could see the target. The bullet flew blind, down a ravine, through thick fog, across an angle that required faith, not math. On the other side of the pass, inside the middle vehicle of the convoy, Helmut Krauss was turning to mock his subordinate. The bullet struck directly through his open mouth. No one else was hit, no window broken, just one man, instantly silenced, mid-sentence. His guards pulled him out and stared upward into the mist. Nothing, no glint, no muzzle flash, not even a sound, just the wind, curling back into silence, as if the mountain had exhaled a single breath. That's when they began calling him Wind Killer, not because of the force of his shots, but because they arrived like wind, invisible, natural, absolute. British engineers later tried to recreate the shot using math, maps, even digital terrain modeling decades after the war. Every simulation failed. One physicist concluded, either the shooter had premonition, or he was somewhere we don't understand. Wâpanagwut never commented. He simply took the shell casing, buried it in a tree, and walked until he forgot the direction of the wind. He wasn't chasing glory or revenge. He was chasing balance. Because as long as the war created monsters, something older had to rise to answer them, something colder, something quieter, something that didn't need permission to act. The last time anyone saw Wâpanagwut in uniform, he was walking away from a burned-out German radio station with a crow perched on his shoulder. That same morning, an intercepted transmission from a retreating Nazi unit repeated a single word over and over. Spurlos, German for without a trace. They weren't just losing ground, they were losing the sense of where the enemy was even standing. Because Wâpanagwut had evolved past being a sniper, he became a presence, not tied to place or rank or even rules of war. He appeared where logic said he couldn't. He disappeared before boots could hit the dirt. Officers who bragged about being immune to superstition began sleeping in cellars, terrified not of him, but of what he represented. By summer 1942, Allied command had no more updates, no fresh kills, no sightings, only rumors. A farmer in Belgium said he saw a man with long braids sitting under a tree, carving the stock of a rifle with a feather quill. A Scottish demolitions team swore someone cleared a Nazi sniper nest before they arrived, despite it being miles from any known patrol. And in one of the final OSS reports from the French campaign, a line was scribbled in pencil. "We are not alone in this war. Something older is watching." That same month, German forces retreated from an Alpine village before Allied troops arrived. Not because of artillery, not because of orders, but because someone had placed 13 hawk feathers across the village entrance, each dipped in ash, pointing inward. They feared the man who left no shadow, because shadows could be followed, tracked, predicted. But Wâpanagwut, he left only questions. Where did he sleep? What side did he truly fight for? Why did his bullets never leave a second shot behind? And then, just like that, the files stopped. Not because he was dead, not because he was captured. Because even the intelligence officers tasked with documenting his movements began to realize they were writing about someone who no longer obeyed the physical laws they were trained to observe. One agent, reviewing the last known field report, wrote, "If he still walks among us, it is not in boots, it is in silence, in memory, in the brief pause before a tyrant speaks, and the sound that never comes." And somewhere, in a forest no map records, A single rifle rests beneath the snow, waiting. Decades passed. New wars came. New enemies. New weapons that didn't need human hands to aim or fire. But in a cold archive beneath Ottawa, behind a locked cabinet marked D&D, closed files, there sat a folder no one dared reopen. Not because it was forbidden, but because it didn't belong. Inside were 9 sheets of weathered parchment, not standard military paper. Handwritten, no rank, no seal, just a name. Wâpanagwut, NS-47. Observed events. Each page described incidents that defied physics. Bullets bending around objects. Rifles with no rifling marks. Targets dead before a shot was heard. The language was clinical and frightened. At the bottom of every page, a hand-drawn feather pointed downward. When a young analyst stumbled across it in 1987, he brought it to his superior. The man read half a page and closed the folder. "Don't ever touch this again," he said. "This isn't a file. It's a reckoning." The analyst was later reassigned. The folder was moved. Again. Eventually it disappeared entirely, but rumors lingered. A retired Cree elder in Manitoba said the wind sometimes carried voices of men he'd never met, speaking German. A hunter in the Yukon swore he once found a tree split by a bullet from no angle that made sense. And a U.S. ballistics lab, reviewing classified footage from Wâpanagwut for AI training, flagged a single impossible shot. The AI marked it synthetic, but the metadata confirmed it was real. A field historian who came across whispers of NS-47 tried to write a book about him. It was never published. When asked why, he simply said, "Some ghosts don't want biographies. They want silence." And yet, his story was never about him. It was about what happens when the world forgets that not all soldiers fight with flags. Some fight with memory, with silence, with land. And when those men rise, even history can't contain them, because they weren't shaped by war. They were shaped before it. It started again with a whisper. A Canadian journalist researching Indigenous veterans of Wâpanagwut requested service records for Wâpanagwut. The archives returned nothing. No enlistment papers, no discharge, not even a trace in census data. So the journalist tried a different route, visiting old Cree communities in northern Manitoba, asking elders if they had heard stories of a hunter who went to Europe and came back, changed. Most stayed silent. But one woman, nearly blind, said this: "He walked like wind on rock. He came back without sound. He buried his rifle in a tree and never spoke war again." The journalist pressed further. Days later, a package arrived on his doorstep. Inside was a single brass shell casing, wrapped in birch bark, no note, no return address. Etched into the casing were 3 words: "Missed no truth." The story was never supposed to surface. That's why the files were shredded, why the sightings were marked as hallucinations, why every institution was sold, military, scientific, journalistic, walked away the moment Wâpanagwut's name came up. Because he didn't fit the model. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a weapon. He wasn't even a man in the way war likes to define men. He was response. A balance sent when imbalance rose. A silent sent when noise ruled. And maybe that's why the final photograph ever associated with him was found not in a war archive, but in a church in a French village, half burned, half preserved. It showed a man in partial uniform sitting beneath a tree. No rank, no patch, just a feather at his feet. Behind him, 13 Nazi rifles stacked in a pyramid. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written, "The war made monsters, so the land sent something older." That photo, too, disappeared from public record, but not before it was copied, and not before one final, unsigned letter reached the Canadian Ministry of Defense. Some names are never spoken aloud, some rifles are never displayed, some truths are earned through silence. And so the world moved on. But in the stillness between war and memory, between fact and legend, one thing remains: the quiet truth that sometimes, when evil rises in boots, the land replies in feathers.